Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Amelia Trent and Andrea Silber. Amelia is a medical student and Andrea is an oncologist. Together, they co-wrote the Kevin MD article, Medicine Must Create Inclusive Clinical Trials. Amelia and Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for
Hi,
having me.
Kevin.
All right, we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, I'm going to ask each of you your journey and your story to where you got to today. Amelia, why don't you go first?
Yeah, so I'm a third-year medical student at Yale now. I also went to Yale for undergrad, and I spent my gap year doing breast cancer research at Amelia Cancer Hospital. And that's where I met Dr. Silber. She had such great ideas about improving care for the underserved. In undergrad, I loved my global health and public health classes, and I felt really compelled to work on projects that benefited those who struggled to get the best care. So working together was a natural fit.
Excellent. And Andrea, can you share your story and your journey to where you are today?
I came to Yale in 1981, and at that time, health disparities, justice, social justice, those weren't terms that were in common usage. But I could tell even then that people who were poor or people who were underrepresented minorities had worse outcomes. And I've spent my whole career trying to figure out novel ways to make things better, at least in the case of cancer.
All right, so let's talk about your Kevin MD article, Medicine Must Create Inclusive Clinical Trials. Amelia, for those who haven't read the article, can you just walk my audience through it and maybe share the story why you and Andrea decided to write it?
Yeah, so our article was based in part on the findings of a paper that we published over the summer that was about Dr. Silber's Own It initiative. Own It stands for Oncology Welcomes New Haven into Trials. The goal of the initiative is to increase diversity in clinical trials at Amelia Cancer Hospital. Dr. Silber's made some great progress with this over the last few years through doing community outreach and focus groups and working with the institutional leadership. So the paper focused on the initiative and the results of a survey study that we did that was with 200 breast cancer patients about their knowledge, attitudes, and experiences with clinical trials. We also looked at the inclusion and exclusion criteria of breast cancer clinical trials that Smile had offered. We decided to write the Kevin MD article because of everything that's been going on in the world. Mm-hmm. There's been such a focus on clinical trials in relation to the COVID vaccine and COVID treatments. And given that COVID has disproportionately affected people of color and everything that's been going on with the anti-racism movement, there's been a lot more focus on health disparities. And we wanted to draw attention to this important health disparity, that people of color are underrepresented in clinical trials. And this really matters because research studies are an important part of the scientific process. Medical breakthroughs come through clinical trials. Mm-hmm. And it's our belief and the belief of experts in the field that populations that are not included in research studies are not going to benefit as much from the research studies as those who participate. And so clinical trials can either help reduce health disparities or can perpetuate them depending on how we do our studies.
And Andrea, what are the specific obstacles that both researchers and minority populations face when it comes to being included in clinical trials?
There are so many barriers, and that we're really trying to make a difference in working on them. One of the things is there's a lot of time and participation in the clinic, which means that people who work in everyday working jobs, they can't get off from work to participate. They need to be able to communicate with nurses during the day, to say nothing of extra expenses with transportation and childcare. And our system is broken and it needs to be recreated so that cancer care represents all people. And those clinical trials need to mirror the real world where people work, they take care of families, and they have cancer and need to participate in clinical research.
Amelia, one of the things that you and Andrea co-wrote in the article was some of the hesitancy when it comes to outreach of minority populations, especially in the historical context. Can you briefly talk about that?
So I think there's been a historically held belief among people in the medical system that people of color don't want to participate in trials, that they don't trust us because of some of the really horrible things that medicine has done in the name of science in the past to them, such as the Tuskegee experiment, the Henrietta Lacks tragedy. But I think through our research, we feel like that's really not the whole story, that there are a lot of barriers that have to do with the institution and the way that we set up our trials that are stopping people of color from participating. That is not necessarily that they don't want to.
And Amelia, what are some of the solutions that you and Andrea describe in your paper to address some of these issues?
We feel researchers have to design their studies differently. We need to look at the inclusion and exclusion criteria and make sure that we're not saying that people who don't speak English as their first language can't participate, that we're not excluding people with chronic diseases that disproportionately affect people of color unless it's unsafe for them to participate in these studies, that we're making sure that studies are accessible to everyone in terms of the language that we're using so that it's readable to people who don't have a medical education, and that it's accessible from a geographic standpoint as well.
And Andrea, you mentioned the COVID trials and how important it is to include minority participants, especially since COVID is disproportionately affecting them. So from what you know with the Pfizer Moderna trials, what have they done to include enough minorities into their trials when it comes to the COVID vaccines?
There was outreach, and there have been special attention with both those trials to increasing minority population. But even inclusion in the trial doesn't necessarily mean that everyone in the community is going to accept those results. I had a discussion with one of my patients who's a community activist in New Haven. And I said, "You're participating on one of my clinical trials. Will you accept the vaccine?" She said, "No way, I don't trust the government."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "But you trust me, and that's why you participated." And she looked at me and she said, "Yeah, that's right." So I think we have to take it out of the realm of government politics and really have a dialogue between our healthcare workers, trusted individuals, and the rest of the community.
We're talking to Amelia Trent and Andrea Silber. Amelia is a medical student, Andrea is an oncologist, and together they co-wrote the Kevin MD article, Medicine Must Create Inclusive Clinical Trials. Now, my last question always is going to be a take-home message, so I'm going to ask each of you the same one. Amelia, start first. What is your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
Yeah, I think that we're charged with ensuring that science moves forward at the same pace for everyone. And to do that, we need to create inclusive trials. And that will be more work for us, but it's the right thing to do.
And Andrea, what is your take-home message that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience?
It may be a little surprising given how hard 2020 was for everyone, but there are incredible lessons and knowledge that we've all gained from 2020. And that means that we need to be safe for our patients and convenient for our patients. And some of those lessons can be adapted to clinical research. Do we need to bring someone in every day to conduct a trial if in real world we give chemotherapy and we can do at-home visits? So my hope is that some of the things we've learned about how to take care of patients safely in their own communities is going to translate to better clinical trials, patient-centered clinical trials, and hopefully a situation where everyone gets the same cancer care and, more importantly, the same outcomes.
Well, thanks to both of you for sharing your time and insight, and thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you.